Lena's world was shrinking, her body failing her. But as her hands lost their grip on conventional art, they discovered a profound new language, a silent symphony woven into fabric. Could a dying artist, through the very senses she was losing, teach a world obsessed with sight how to truly feel again? The tremor began in her left hand, a cruel, mocking pulse that had become the metronome to her dwindling days. Lena, at 32, felt ancient, a prisoner in a body that was slowly turning to stone. Her world had shrunk to this cramped studio above a 24-hour laundromat, where the rhythmic thumping of washing machines below was a constant, dull heartbeat against her floorboards. The air was thick with the scent of dust, old wool, and the faint, chemical tang of bleach wafting up from below, a stark contrast to the living, breathing art she willed into existence. Her fingers, once so nimble and sure they could dance across fabric, now fought her with every stitch. This was the true cruelty of her neurodegenerative disease. It attacked her hands, the very conduits of her soul. She was working on what she knew with a certainty that hollowed out her chest would be her final piece, a scarf. But it was more than a scarf. It was a testament, a final, desperate whisper of her unique, unsung talent. The fabric was a blend of cashmere and silk, the color of a faded summer sky just before a storm. Into this material, Lena was weaving an emotion, a memory so specific it ached. She wasn't just sewing, she was transcribing a feeling. The feeling of a forgotten summer afternoon from her childhood, the impossible warmth of sun-baked flagstones on bare feet, the distant drone of a lawnmower, the sweet, heavy scent of honeysuckle mingling with cut grass. Each pull of the needle was a word in a silent language she had invented, a loose, open stitch for the expansive warmth, a tight, almost sharp knot for the pang of knowing the day had to end. This scarf was destined for a small charity event for the visually impaired, a last, desperate attempt to connect with those who might understand. Not with their eyes, but with their fingertips. She held no grand illusions of fame or recognition. The dreams of Parisian runways and magazine spreads had withered and died alongside the nerve endings in her hands. Now she only hoped that one person, just one, would touch this scarf and feel the sun. Feel the bittersweet ache of a perfect moment already lost to time. It was a fool's hope, perhaps, but in the encroaching darkness of her illness, it was the only light she had left. The community center buzzed with a polite, sterile energy that felt a million miles from the passionate chaos of Lena's studio. The air smelled of weak coffee and industrial disinfectant. Her small table, draped in a plain white cloth, was tucked away in a corner near the restrooms, an afterthought in the brightly lit, cavernous room. The acoustics were terrible. Every scrape of a chair and burst of laughter echoed off the linoleum floors, creating a jarring cacophony. Other tables showcased practical items, ergonomic canes, large print calendars, audio devices that chirped and beeped. Hers was an island of silent, abstract art in a sea of functional solutions. Lena had arranged her few pieces with painstaking care. A vest stitched with the sharp, cold texture of a winter morning's grief. A pair of gloves that held the tentative, uneven warmth of a new friendship. And in the center, the summer afternoon scarf. For the first hour, people came and went, guided by volunteers with relentlessly cheerful smiles. They were kind, of course. A woman with a gentle voice ran her hand over the grief vest. Lena held her breath. The woman paused, then murmured, "Oh, the quilting on this is so sturdy. It would be perfect for gardening." Lena's smile felt like a crack in plaster. She had stitched that vest in the week following her diagnosis, each sharp, tight, not a tear she couldn't shed. To have that raw pain described as sturdy felt like a physical blow. Later, a young man, his eyes unfocused and his movements still hesitant with recent blindness, was led to her table. He brushed a hand impatiently over the gloves. "They're just gloves," he said, a sharp edge of frustration in his voice. He was looking for tools to navigate his new darkness, not abstract comfort. Each compliment was a small, polite stone dropped into the vast well of her loneliness. "The lining is so soft." What a lovely, thick weave. They felt the fabric but not the feeling. They appreciated the craftsmanship, but not the story. The intricate language she had poured her soul into remained untranslated, a series of beautiful but meaningless textures. A quiet, crushing despair began to settle over her, cold and heavy as a wet blanket. Her hands, resting in her lap, felt alien and useless. The faint tremor was a constant, mocking reminder of her failure. With a sigh that seemed to drain the last of her energy, she began to fold her pieces. She packed away the grief vest, then the friendship gloves. Her movements were slow, ceremonial. It was time to go home, to accept that her final message would remain undelivered, lost in a world that had no language for it. She was folding the summer scarf, its soft weight a final, gentle mockery in her hands, when a presence shifted the air beside her. He hadn't been guided by a volunteer. He moved with a quiet, deliberate confidence that was unlike anyone else in the room, his long white cane sweeping the floor in silent, rhythmic arcs. He was tall, with a lean frame and a face that seemed sculpted for stillness, his dark sunglasses hiding his eyes but not the intense focus of his expression. He stopped beside her table, his head tilted slightly, as if listening to something beyond the room's chatter. Lena froze, her hand still clutching the scarf. He didn't speak. Instead, he raised a hand, palm open, and moved it slowly through the air just above her display. It was an unnervingly graceful gesture, like a conductor seeking the first note of a symphony. His fingers bypassed the empty space where the grief vest had been, ignored the spot where the gloves had been, and then, with an uncanny precision, they descended. They didn't just land on the scarf. They settled into it as if finding a long-lost home. His name was Jerome. His touch was a revelation. It wasn't the polite, cursory brush of the others. His fingertips traced the lines of her stitching with the sensitivity of a musician reading a score. They lingered on the tight, anxious knots she'd made to signify the approaching end of the day, then smoothed over the looser, open weaves that held the memory of sunlight. A deep line of concentration formed between his brows. The noisy room, the cheerful volunteers, the beeping gadgets, it all seemed to fade into a distant, irrelevant hum. For a full minute, he was silent, his entire being focused on the fabric beneath his hand, a silent conversation taking place that only the two of them could understand. Lena watched, breathless, a wild, impossible hope flickering in her chest. It was so fragile it terrified her. Then he lifted his head, his covered eyes seeming to find her exact location in the room. His voice, when it came, was a low, resonant murmur that cut through all the noise, intimate and clear. "This feels like the last Sunday in August," he said, his voice laced with a quiet awe. "Right before a thunderstorm. The air is still and heavy, and you know it's all about to break. But you're trying to hold onto that last piece of sunshine." The air left Lena's lungs in a rush. He hadn't just felt it, he had heard it. He had read the story she wrote in thread, translating it back to her with a poet's precision. He had found the ache, the warmth, the impending loss. He had found asterisk her asterisk. Tears pricked at the back of her eyes, hot and sharp. For the first time in years, she wasn't a patient, a charity case, or a purveyor of sturdy textiles. In that moment, in the eyes of this stranger, she was an artist who had been profoundly, miraculously understood. "How did you?" Lena's voice was a ragged whisper, the words catching in her throat. She felt exposed, as if he'd read a deeply personal letter she'd never intended to send. A slow, knowing smile spread across Jerome's face. "I lost my sight 5 years ago," he explained, his hand still resting on the scarf, as if drawing energy from it. "A car accident. When you lose one sense so suddenly, the others don't just get stronger. They change. They have to. They learn a new language to make sense of the world. Most people just feel texture, soft, rough, smooth. I feel the intention behind it, the emotional temperature." He finally lifted his hand from the scarf and gestured to the canvas bag where she'd packed the vest. "The other one, the one you put away first. May I?" Numbly, Lena pulled out the grief vest. Her hands trembled as she handed it to him, the tremor more pronounced than it had been all day. The fabric felt cold and brittle in her own hands, a perfect reflection of the memory it held. Jerome took it, his fingers immediately finding the sharp, tight quilting near the collar. His smile vanished, replaced by a look of deep, resonant empathy. He didn't need to trace the whole garment. He held it for a moment, his expression somber, his head bowed. "This is different," he said softly, his voice dropping an octave. "This is a closed door, a final word spoken in an empty room. There's a coldness here, a sharp, splintered kind of loss. It's not a loud, dramatic grief. It's the quiet after the scream. The moment you realize something is gone forever." Lena sank onto the folding chair behind her, the strength gone from her legs. He was reading the pages of her diary. He was touching the rawest parts of her soul and describing them with a gentle, devastating accuracy. This wasn't just understanding. It was a form of communion she had never imagined possible. A single tear escaped and traced a hot path down her cheek. "I'm a model," Jerome continued, setting the vest down carefully as if it were a fragile relic. "Which is an irony, I know. A blind man in the most visual of industries. I walk the runways, and the designers tell me the clothes are beautiful, but to me, they're dead. Just fabric expertly cut. There's no story, no feeling. They're empty shells." He turned his full attention back to her, and she could feel the electrifying intensity of his focus. "But this is alive. This is what fashion should be. It should be a way to feel asterisk, not just to see." He leaned forward, his voice dropping with urgency. "We have to work together, think of it. A full collection, an entire narrative in thread. I can be your translator. I can wear these stories on the runway. I can show them. We could teach a world obsessed with surfaces how to feel again." The idea hung in the air between them, vibrant and terrifying. "Don't you see? This isn't just for the visually impaired. This is for everyone who has forgotten how to touch, how to connect." The words struck Lena like a defibrillator. An idea, a future, a collaboration. It was a concept she had packed away long ago, in a box marked impossible. Yet hearing it from him, it didn't sound impossible. It sounded like destiny. The fragile flicker of hope she'd felt moments ago didn't just grow. It ignited, a fierce, brilliant flame in the desolate landscape of her heart. For the first time since her diagnosis, she wasn't thinking about the ending. She was thinking about a beginning. The months that followed were a blur of frantic creation, a desperate, beautiful race against the clock. Lena's studio, once a sanctuary of quiet despair, became a vibrant hub of collaboration. The air, once heavy with dust and the scent of decay, now smelled of new fabrics, raw silk, coarse linen, plush velvet, and the constant aroma of strong black tea that fueled their long hours. Jerome was there almost every day, a constant, grounding presence who navigated the cluttered space with an innate grace that still astonished her. Lena's body was a battlefield. Some mornings, her hands were so stiff and clumsy she would weep in frustration, unable to thread a needle. On those days, Jerome would gently take her hands in his, massaging the tense muscles until the tremors subsided. On others, a wave of exhaustion would wash over her, so profound she could only lie on her small cot, her voice a faint guide as Jerome sorted fabrics by feel. "The gray one, Jerome. The one that feels like a promise of rain," she'd murmur, and he would always find the exact one. But her mind, her creative spirit, was on fire, fueled by Jerome's unwavering belief. She pushed past the pain, channeling every sensation, every memory, every fleeting emotion into her designs. They developed a unique, intimate symbiosis. Lena would describe an emotion, the sharp, electric thrill of a first kiss, the hollow ache of watching a friend move away, the quiet, steady contentment of a shared silence. Then she would translate it into a physical concept, a sleeve that started with a rough, hesitant texture and softened into the smoothest silk, a collar with a hidden, sharp edge that would prick the wearer's neck just slightly, a reminder of lurking anxiety, a seam that meandered aimlessly across a back panel like a confused thought. Jerome was her litmus test, her partner in creation. He would run his hands over her works in progress, his feedback immediate and intuitive. "No, the transition here is too sudden," he'd say, tracing a seam on a jacket meant to represent forgiveness. "The hope feels unearned. It needs a moment of doubt first, maybe a rougher patch of linen right here before the cashmere." He didn't just understand her vision. He helped refine it, sharpen it, make it more true. He was more than a translator. He was her co-creator, her hands when hers failed, her strength when hers gave out. Through his industry connections and sheer, stubborn persistence, Jerome secured them a spot. Not just any spot, but a coveted slot at the annual Inclusive Design Gala, a prestigious event known for championing boundary-pushing work. The news was both a triumph and a death sentence. It gave them a deadline, a magnificent, terrifying goal that hung over every stitch, every measurement, every late-night conversation. The night of the show, the backstage area was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. Models rushed by in clouds of hairspray, designers barked orders, and the air crackled with a high-strung, electric energy. Lena sat on a crate in a quiet corner, her hands wrapped around a cup of lukewarm tea to still their violent tremors. She was pale and visibly exhausted, a fragile bird in the midst of a hurricane, but her eyes, fixed on Jerome as he stood ready for his first walk, burned with a brilliant, feverish light. He was their sole model, a sole vessel for their shared story. He found her in the chaos, bent down and squeezed her shoulder, a silent promise. "Ready to make them feel something," he whispered, his voice a calm anchor in the storm. Lena nodded, a slow, determined smile gracing her lips. "It's all I have left to give." The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the packed auditorium. Instead of the thumping bass of a typical runway show, a single, clear voice filled the space, Lena's. It was a recording, her voice calm and steady, stripped of all artifice. "Close your eyes," she invited. "Forget what you see. For the next few minutes I want you to feel." A single spotlight found Jerome at the head of the runway. He wore the first piece, Hesitant Hope, a simple, raw linen shirt, the texture coarse and uncertain. As he walked, his movements were slow, tentative, mirroring the fabric's feel. Lena's voice guided the audience, describing not the garment's cut, but the feeling of standing at a precipice, afraid to take the first step. Next came Shared Grief, a heavy, dark wool coat. The weight of it was visible in the way Jerome's shoulders were slightly bowed, his pace more somber. The fabric was interwoven with sharp, almost painful threads that were invisible to the eye, but Lena's narration spoke of the shared pain that, while heavy, creates an unbreakable bond. In the silent audience, people shifted, unconsciously touching their own arms, their own hearts. Piece by piece, the story of a life unfolded. The electric thrill of first love, a silk shirt so light it seemed to float, it seemed stitched in a rapid, heartbeat-like pattern. The jagged confusion of betrayal, a jacket with asymmetrical lines and conflicting textures that seemed to fight each other. Jerome was magnificent. He wasn't just modeling clothes, he was embodying them. His posture, the speed of his walk, the angle of his head, it all served the emotion of the fabric. He was the physical manifestation of Lena's soul. The final piece was called Rebirth. It was a long coat that began at the shoulders with the same rough, cold fabric of the grief vest, a nod to where her journey had started. But as the coat descended, the fabric miraculously transformed, transitioning through a dozen textures, from coarse to soft, from cold to warm, finally culminating in a hem of the most impossibly soft, warm cashmere, the color of a sunrise. It was the feeling of a fever breaking, of a locked door swinging open. Jerome reached the end of the runway. He stopped, and for the first time he smiled, a radiant, genuine smile of pure, unadulterated joy. He held out his hands, inviting the world to feel the warmth. For a long moment there was absolute silence. It was a stunned, breathless quiet, thick with emotion. The audience hadn't just watched a fashion show. They had been on a journey. Then, a single person began to clap. Another joined and another, until the room erupted in a tidal wave of applause that was more than just appreciation. It was understanding. It was catharsis. It was recognition. Backstage, hidden in the shadows, Lena leaned against the wall, tears streaming down her face, and listened to the sound of her soul being heard. After the storm of applause subsided, and the backstage area filled with exhilarated chatter and popping champagne corks, Jerome found Lena in their quiet corner. He knelt before her, taking her trembling hands in his. "You did it, Lena," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You made the whole world feel your warmth." Her illness didn't vanish. There was no miracle cure, but in that moment the disease felt small, insignificant. The tremor in her hands was just a tremor, not a death sentence. She had been seen. She had been heard. She had been felt. The Emotional Tactility Collection was a phenomenon. A foundation dedicated to art therapy and inclusive design took notice, offering to fund a permanent project in Lena's name, ensuring her unique language would continue to be taught and explored. A few months later, Lena watched a recording of the show from her hospice bed. Her body was weak, but her spirit was serene. She saw Jerome on the screen, radiant in the sunrise coat, and she smiled. Her life was ending, but her art, the warmth she had stitched from pain and hope, had touched the world. It would live on, a testament to a woman who, in losing everything, taught everyone how to feel.